Hello and welcome to Helicone. In today's episode, we're going to learn about the United States of America. Now, if you have the luxury of spending the next several hundred hours reading about and discussing every moment in American history, well, congratulations. First, that sounds pretty great. And second, you will likely come to different conclusions than what we're presenting here today. This is a study hall series meant to introduce you to the major themes and events that historians have decided are important to know about the United States. So we're going to start at the beginning. We'll cover US history from the first peoples to the present day. For each topic, we'll use one episode to dive deep into a particular theme or event, and then another episode to consider the broader historical significance of that topic. This means there's a lot of history we won't cover in this series. As such, we encourage you to explore those topics further on your own and in your classroom. Also, a lot happened in the history of the United States, and sadly, some of that history includes violence, oppression, and injustice. The stories of all the people affected by these events are important. And while we won't be able to tell all of those stories here, we want to acknowledge them and encourage you to do the same. Finally, we recognize that studying history can bring up strong emotions. That's why we've included resources in the description for this video and others throughout the series. They can help if you need someone to talk to while you're exploring these topics. Okay, let's get started. The story of the United States began long before the arrival of Europeans. For thousands of years, diverse peoples with rich cultures built societies across the land we now call the United States. Some of the earliest were the ancestral Pueblones, who built impressive structures like Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. Further east, the Hopewell culture flourished with large earthen mounds. And in the Mississippi River Valley, the great city of Cahokia arose with its iconic earthen mound, Monk's Mound, all across the continent. These and other societies thrived with complex social structures, economies, and belief systems. Their societies were sophisticated and sustainable, living in harmony with the land. But around 1300 CE, most of these cultures were abandoned. Historians aren't exactly sure why, but it may have had to do with changes in rainfall and farming, and the result was a nearly empty continent when Europeans arrived in the 1600s. When they did arrive, they brought diseases that devastated native populations and claimed millions of lives. In the following decades, European powers competed for land in North America, fighting among themselves and with the various indigenous peoples who still lived there. Eventually, the British and French established colonies along the Atlantic coast, followed by colonies further west. But as colonists moved into new territories, they encountered new peoples, often violently. Colonists also had different visions for how the region should be governed. These differences, combined with growing tensions with Britain over issues like taxation, led to the American Revolution. In 1776, delegates from 13 of the colonies met at the Continental Congress and declared independence from Britain, creating a new nation guided by Enlightenment ideas about natural rights and popular sovereignty. The resulting war pitted Americans against Britain and their loyalist supporters. After 8 years of fighting, the Treaty of Paris recognized the United States as a sovereign nation stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. But even as the new country celebrated its independence, the institution of slavery remained intact. While many people in the North eventually called for the end of slavery, Southerners fiercely defended it. As a result, the question of slavery would grow into one of the most contentious issues in American politics. In 1820, Congress passed the Missouri Compromise, admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. But it also drew a line across the rest of the Louisiana Purchase, prohibiting slavery north of that line. As more territories sought admission to the Union, this issue caused ever greater political tension, setting the stage for the coming crisis. The U.S. continued to grow throughout the 1800s, expanding both westward and in population. But the debate over slavery continued. In 1850, California's admission as a free state threatened to tip the balance of power in the Senate in favor of free states. To prevent that, the Compromise of 1850 admitted California as a free state, but also passed more restrictive laws governing slavery in the newly acquired Mexican territories. 4 years later, the Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed voters in these territories to decide the issue of slavery for themselves. When anti-slavery and pro-slavery settlers flooded into Kansas to vote, it descended into violence and became known as Bleeding Kansas. Meanwhile, the national political parties split over slavery with the formation of the Republican Party, which opposed its expansion. When the issue of slavery in the territories reached the Supreme Court, the Dred Scott decision ruled that enslaved people were property and had no standing to sue in court, only fanning the flames of the controversy. By 1867, Southern states had seceded from the Union, arguing that since the federal government could not protect their right to own enslaved people, they were no longer bound by the Constitution. Soon after, Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter, beginning the U.S. Civil War. The 4-year conflict pitted the industrial and technological advancements of the North against the agricultural economy and military traditions of the South. As the war raged, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared enslaved people in Confederate territory free. With this shift, the war took on new meaning, not just about preserving the Union, but also about ending slavery. Ultimately, the Union won the war and preserved the United States. But the country was left divided over how to integrate formerly enslaved people into society. Reconstruction sought to address this through the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, abolishing slavery, granting citizenship and voting rights to African American men. However, white Southerners resisted these reforms and enacted Jim Crow laws to restrict the freedoms of African Americans. Enforcement of these amendments waned, and despite the activism of groups like the NAACP, racial inequality persisted for generations. As the United States entered the 20th century, it was a world away from the agrarian nation envisioned by the Founding Fathers. Major cities had become hubs of industry and immigration. New technologies transformed daily life, and the United States was becoming a global power. But not everyone benefited equally. As the United States entered World War I, it joined a global conflict between the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. Initially staying out of the conflict, the U.S. eventually joined the Allies due to the sinking of the Lusitania and renewed German aggression. After the war ended, the United States emerged as a major power and participated in the Paris Peace Conference. Though the Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh reparations on Germany, President Woodrow Wilson pushed for a more lenient peace, emphasizing his famous 14 points. The U.S. didn't join the League of Nations, however, which many believed would drag them into future conflicts in Europe. Back home, the booming economy of the 1920s gave rise to new forms of entertainment, consumer culture, and artistic expression. Prohibition was enacted in 1920 with the passage of the 18th Amendment, but was widely ignored and even helped to fuel organized crime. In 1929, the stock market crashed, leading to the Great Depression, which lasted throughout the 1930s. President Herbert Hoover initially believed the economic downturn would be brief, but instead it deepened during his presidency. When Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected in 1932, he quickly set about reforming the country through the New Deal. This series of programs created jobs, provided relief, and reformed banking and industry. Though the New Deal didn't end the Depression, it did lessen its impact. In 1941, the United States entered World War II after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. It quickly became a global conflict as the United Nations and the Axis powers clashed. Under the leadership of figures like Dwight Eisenhower, Harry Truman, and Douglas MacArthur, the United States played a key role in defeating the Axis powers. After the war ended, the United States emerged as a superpower with a significant global presence. In the following decades, the U.S. and the Soviet Union engaged in a global standoff known as the Cold War, though they never directly fought. They competed for influence in a proxy war in Korea and through an escalating arms race. The U.S. enjoyed an economic boom in the post-war era, with suburbs, highways, and consumer goods. But this prosperity was not shared by everyone. People of color and women continued to face discrimination, and activists began to push for change. The Montgomery bus boycott and the activism of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. helped launch the Civil Rights Movement, which successfully fought for equal access to public facilities, voting rights, and desegregation. But violence and opposition continued, and it would take decades to achieve full equality. The United States continued to grow throughout the latter half of the 20th century. New technologies transformed communications, transportation, and daily life. The country faced new challenges like the Watergate scandal and an economic recession in the early 1980s. Throughout the Cold War, U.S. raced with the Soviet Union to explore space with the Apollo program, culminating in Neil Armstrong becoming the first person to walk on the moon in 1969. The United States also expanded its involvement overseas, with the Vietnam War dividing the country and raising questions about the role of the U.S. in global affairs. And so we come to the present day. The United States today faces challenges both old and new. Issues of racial inequality continue to roil the country. Economic anxiety persists, and debates over health care, gun control, and LGBTQ rights continue to divide the country. But the United States also has a long history of reinvention and addressing injustice. And as it looks to the future, it can draw strength from its past struggles and triumphs. From the activism of the 1960s to the fight for marriage equality, the United States has addressed injustice before. As it looks to the future, it can draw strength from its past struggles and triumphs. Thanks for watching this episode. If you like the video, don't forget to like and share the video, and subscribe my channel.